There are moments in life when emotion doesn't arrive as tears or words, but as silence that finally becomes too heavy to carry. Imagine sitting in a studio chair, smiling into a camera, doing everything right, and suddenly your voice cracks. Not from performance, but from something deeper breaking through. That is the kind of moment that stays with people even when they don't fully understand it. It looks ordinary on the surface, but underneath it carries years of pressure, love, loss, and identity, unraveling all at once in real time. This is the story of strength hidden inside collapse. 2. The moment everything started to feel different by 2019. Life on the surface still looked stable for Kelly Clarkson, but inside, something was shifting in ways she couldn't fully name. At home, the noise of success faded into quiet nights where conversations became shorter, and silence began to stretch longer than comfort allowed. There was no dramatic explosion, no single moment that explained everything. Instead, it was the slow realization that something essential had changed. When silence replaces connection, it often becomes louder than any argument, and for her, that silence was the beginning of understanding that life as she knew it was already slipping away. 3. A life woven too tightly to undo easily. Her marriage to Brandon Blackstock wasn't just personal. It was deeply interconnected with her entire professional world. He wasn't only a husband but also her manager, shaping schedules, decisions, and business paths. Over time, that closeness created a life where boundaries blurred, and separating one part meant unraveling everything else. When the relationship began to break, it wasn't just emotional pain she faced, but structural collapse. Every decision, contract, and plan suddenly felt tangled in shared history. Trying to separate identity from partnership became like trying to undo threads that had been tightly woven for years without knowing where to begin. 4. The divorce that redefined everything she believed in 2020. The decision to file for divorce made what had been unspoken suddenly real. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a belief system built on trust, permanence, and forever. Kelly later admitted she never expected things to end that way, and that sense of shock lingered far longer than the legal process itself. The public saw headlines about custody and financial discussions, but what they couldn't see was the internal collapse of certainty. She wasn't just losing a partner. She was losing the version of life she had built every expectation around. 5. When another star had already lived the same shadow years earlier, Blake Shelton had experienced his own version of public emotional collapse when his marriage to Miranda Lambert ended. To the world, they represented success, harmony, and country music royalty. Behind that image, however, something far more fragile existed. When it ended in 2015, it left him disoriented, questioning identity and direction in ways fame couldn't protect him from. The loss wasn't only romantic, it was existential. He later spoke about falling into isolation and trying to understand who he was outside of that shared life. It was the same emotional silence, just wearing a different face. 6. 2 broken stories. Finding reflection, not romance. When Blake Shelton later crossed paths with Gwen Stefani during their time on The Voice, it wasn't a fairy tale beginning. It was recognition between 2 people carrying similar emotional weight. Gwen was also moving through the aftermath of her divorce from Gavin Rossdale after years of shared life and family. Their connection didn't form from fantasy, but from mutual understanding of what it means to function while quietly falling apart inside. They didn't rush healing. They reflected it back to each other slowly. Sometimes survival begins not with rescue, but with being seen clearly by someone who recognizes your pain without explanation. 7. One woman, no mirror to reflect her pain back. While others found companionship in shared experiences, Kelly Clarkson faced her transformation differently, alone in responsibility, parenting, and public visibility. She wasn't stepping away from life. She was stepping deeper into it while privately breaking apart. Launching her talk show in 2019 meant showing up daily with energy, warmth, and consistency while her internal world shifted unpredictably. There was no partner on set who understood her exact emotional landscape in real time. The contrast mattered. Healing in isolation is not quieter. It is just less witnessed. And in that silence, she began rebuilding without external reflection or shared emotional language. 8. The earlier wounds that never fully disappeared. Long before fame stabilized her life, Kelly had already learned what instability felt like. Childhood experiences shaped by absence and broken family foundations left lasting impressions about trust and permanence. Those early experiences don't vanish with success. They simply evolve into different forms of sensitivity later in life. Even achievements, awards, and public admiration cannot fully silence old emotional memory. So, when her marriage began to dissolve, it wasn't an isolated wound, it echoed older ones. The present heartbreak reopened earlier chapters she had spent years learning to live beside rather than fully resolve. 9. Building through function. When feeling falls apart. During the most difficult period, work became both structure and survival. The talk show required presence, conversation, and energy, regardless of internal condition. Music also remained a channel for emotions too complex for direct explanation. Each performance, interview, or episode became a space where function temporarily replaced feeling. But beneath that consistency, there was ongoing emotional negotiation happening privately. Showing up every day wasn't proof of being unaffected. It was evidence of resilience under pressure. Sometimes strength doesn't look like recovery. It looks like continuing, even when recovery hasn't arrived yet, and no one else can see the effort. 10. Healing without a witness, without a script. Over time, something shifted that wasn't tied to a single moment, but to accumulated choices. Learning to exist without defining herself through another person became its own form of rebuilding. Instead of waiting for external validation or emotional rescue, she began redefining what wholeness meant independently. That process didn't come with headlines or dramatic reveals. It came through repetition, reflection, and gradual self-trust. Healing alone meant facing silence without fear of it. It meant learning that identity doesn't disappear when relationships end. It just becomes something you must finally meet without distraction or shared definition. 11. Outgrow. What strength really looks like in the end. In contrast to stories where healing is shared between two people, this one stands differently because it is about individual reconstruction. Some people rebuild together, and some rebuild alone, and neither path is simple. What matters is not comparison, but survival through change. Kelly Clarkson's story is not defined by loss alone, but by what came after it, the steady return to self, without needing permission to begin again. And the question it leaves behind isn't about fame or relationships, but about courage. What does it mean to become whole when no one is there to do it with you?